Darth Vader is not typically one who is associated with being in the role of a master or having many apprentices. Oftentimes, he is the one being taught or trained by the Emperor. In canon, however, Sidious did task Vader with preparing the members of the Inquisitorius. We got to see what some rudimentary dark side training looked like under Vader when he maimed each one of the Inquisitors to teach them fear and a lesson of loss. As a member of the Rule of Two, it wasn't as though Vader was at liberty to go in depth with training an actual literal apprentice under Palpatine. But in Legends, he broke that rule and trained very many secret apprentices. Some were for the purpose of helping overthrow his master, others were simply agents for his own purposes, and yet, some were for the good of the Empire. But today, we have hacked into Darth Vader's personal database in order to identify each and every person that was apprenticed directly under the Dark Lord. However, it would be too easy to just talk about Starkiller and call it a day, so we decided to take it a step further and make a comprehensive list of every person that is trained under or with Darth Vader at any point in Legends continuity. This will include Sith, Inquisitors, and any Imperial agents that Vader found interest in for one reason or another. But before we delve in, the Force has informed us that some of our agents present have not yet subscribed, so if you too wish to learn the ways of the dark side and use your hate, Force crush that subscribe button, for knowledge is power, and we have much to share. We cannot guarantee that you'll be trained directly by Lord Vader, but you will gain knowledge every time we upload a holocron. So now, let us begin. It would be criminal to not begin with Starkiller, which may or may not be the original still, and the perfected clone known as the Dark Apprentice that appears at the end of The Force Unleashed 2. Galen Marek was born from two well-trained Jedi Knights. Their names were Kento Marek and Mali Marek, endowing Galen with a level of potential straight from birth. He was raised for the first few years of his life in exile on Kashyyyk, before eventually being located by Lord Vader, who at the time was hunting down his father, Kento. After witnessing his father be killed by Vader, Galen instinctively pulled Vader's lightsaber into his hands in a fit of fear and anguish. Impressive since he was merely a toddler. Upon sensing this great potential within the boy, Lord Vader became fascinated by the possibilities and took him in for secret training. He would spend the next 2 decades under Vader's strict and cruel regimen. This included borderline torture, food and sleep deprivation, and nothing but rigorous combat training and drills. Vader was more interested in turning Galen Marek into a weapon rather than a Sith, someone whose power and skill could augment Vader's own when he eventually chose to move against his master. Starkiller was to be his secret weapon, his grenade. While under the codename of Starkiller, Galen would go on several missions to execute survivors of Order 66. This included General Ram Koda, Master Shak Ti, and the Jedi Kazdan Paratus, all while growing closer to his pilot, Juno Eclipse. However, Palpatine would eventually find out about Galen and would force Vader to execute him. The Dark Lord tossed his apprentice out of his Star Destroyer's viewport and left him to die in the vacuum of space. But once Palpatine departed, Vader promptly rescued Galen and rehabilitated him. But by this point, Galen had decided that he could no longer trust Vader and decided to go rogue. He then located Ram Koda, who had managed to survive their previous encounter, and decided to train him in the way of a Jedi and to be his new master. Galen trained as a young Jedi and would go on to take part in the founding of the Rebel Alliance in the EU. However, Lord Vader ended up finding and capturing all of the rebel cells and leaders, including Galen's friends. And now, the Jedi trainee Starkiller, armed with the knowledge of the light and the dark, stormed the early construction of the Death Star, its very bones, to face down against Lord Vader and the Emperor. After dueling and nearly defeating both Sith Lords, it seemed as though victory was his, but he ended up sacrificing himself to the Emperor's lightning when it was time to help his friends escape. Galen Marek displayed an astonishing level of Force potency, as this is still being talked about to this very day. Galen was taught to use the Force for nothing else than pure destructive ability, and to never use anything less than his absolute maximum. He easily dispatched huge Imperial machines of war, buckling AT-STs with his very mind, ripping TIE fighters out of mid-air. In his most impressive feat, Galen used his full power and effort to bring down an Imperial Star Destroyer to the ground. His telekinetic power was even on the level of being able to ragdoll Lord Vader at times. This is still impressive, even if it was later discovered that Vader was holding back in each of their duels. Galen, though, could manifest Force lightning and use it in many creative and uncommon ways, channeling it through his lightsaber like Darth Nihilus, or using it to make lightning shields around his entire body. His power in the Force was always explosive, deadly, and nigh inescapable. The same held true for his skill in lightsaber combat. Galen Marek was an expert in a Sith-focused variant of Form 5 Xian, and was able to utterly annihilate almost anyone that he dueled, except for Vader and Sidious, of course. His clone was even more impressive. Subject 1138 was the genetically modified version of Galen Marek that Vader kept and spent a painstaking amount of time to perfect. Every time Vader attempted to clone his former apprentice, it turned out to be an utter failure of one kind or another. This was until he reached near perfection with 1138. With that said, there is some convincing evidence that this isn't a clone at all, but rather the original Galen Marek given some biological improvements. We made an entire holocron about this very same topic some time ago, so we won't debate the topic here. For the purposes of this video, they shall remain separate, as this we will refer to as 1138. This Starkiller was twice as powerful, twice as deadly, having been trained by Vader not as an assassin, but rather as a true apprentice. Vader's perceived flaw with the original Starkiller, and thus, his power level increased exponentially. 1138 could decimate entire city blocks with one outburst of power, and his force repulse could atomize a small army. The problems with the clone came with the fact that he had the memories and emotions of his past life, which led him to going rogue yet again. He sought out his old friends, Rom Koda, his lover Juno Eclipse. 1138 essentially picked up where Galen Marek left off, as he became the new Starkiller in the lives of his friends. However, Vader was not one to give up on him, and tracked him down to either murder him or turn him back to the dark side. Two of them would confront one another in the cloning labs of Kamino for a final showdown. Again, Starkiller was successful in their duel and managed to capture the Dark Lord, making him a prisoner of the rebellion. Starkiller's story after this was left unconcluded, as The Force Unleashed 3 was never made, but there was a tease of what would come next. Vader had perfectly cloned Starkiller and had made a fully obedient version with no emotions towards his past. Darth Vader labeled this clone the Dark Apprentice, and he would have been Darth Vader's key to defeating the Emperor, to claiming the galaxy for his own, if that story was ever fulfilled. The Dark Apprentice was meant to be Vader's ace in the hole when Starkiller returned to Kamino, but the Dark Lord was defeated before he could call for his apprentice to spring this trap. It is unknown what became of the Dark Apprentice, or what his power levels could have been, but he would have been a Starkiller clone that would not have held back in the slightest. No inkling towards the light side whatsoever was depicted, so that essentially would have been a terror all its own. The next two apprentices that Vader had are Lady Lumaya and an individual known as Flint. Lumaya was once known as Shira Ellen Kola Bree, and she was born as an Imperial during the reign of Sidious. She was a dedicated patriot to the Empire. That, and her force sensitivity garnered her the attention of Vader, who saw her as a possible candidate to become a Shadow Hand. Vader sped the young woman's advancement in various Imperial-sponsored programs, including her enrollment into the Intelligence Academy of Karida. After she graduated with top honors, it was promoted to the rank of Major by Vader himself. Shira was given a highly classified mission to infiltrate the Rebel Alliance. Her mission was to either cause the death, or to orchestrate the death of Luke Skywalker, who at the time, Vader was unaware was his son. Shira ended up gaining a great reputation among the rebels as a phenomenal pilot, and was very well liked and respected. Luke even had a great friendship with her, but during one battle while she was flying with Luke in the squadron, the Force informed Luke that she was an enemy. Acting purely on instinct, and with no understanding of why he did so, Luke Skywalker open-fired on Shira's X-Wing, shooting her down in battle. This did end up leading Luke to being despised for a time among the rebellion, but the victory cost Shira so much more. Her once unmatched beauty was now horribly scarred by the ship crash, and her body was mangled beyond repair. Lord Vader ended up finding her, rehabilitating her with cybernetic augmentation, which made her even more like her master. With this next level of kinship between the two, at least that's the way Shira saw it, they began to train together more often, learning more from the dark side. Shira believed herself to have been actually trained as a fully fledged Sith, although Vader would not agree, and she would take the name Lady Lumaya, Dark Lord of the Sith. She would serve as Darth Vader's shadow hand in secret, while also serving as one of the Emperor's direct hands. Upon visiting the ancient Sith planet of Ziost, Lumaya would fashion her signature weapon, the Light Whip. Though hers was not just a single flexible blade of energy, Lumaya's was more like a flail with many tassels, some of energy, others of Mandalorian iron, or what we now know as Beskar. This made it useful against any type of weapon or armor, and especially deadly against Jedi. But training alongside her was another potential candidate for Vader's Shadow Hand, an Imperial stormtrooper by the name of Flint. This man was the son of a Jedi Knight, Flint Torul, and had planned to join the rebellion. However, Luke and his friends failed to stop the destruction of his home planet of Belladorn and the death of his beloved mother. Because of this, he proclaimed out loud that he would become powerful one day, someone that truly mattered. Vader just so happened to sense and overhear this, believing that the boy held immense power due to his despair, and that the pain had awoken it. He promised Flint to help him fulfill the vow that he had made, and would begin to train him. The Dark Lord had Flint enrolled as a stormtrooper to keep his identity secret, and eventually, he began training the boy in the ways and methods of the dark side. Vader's intention was to have Flint and Lumaya fight to the death one day, as only one could truly be his apprentice and his shadow hand. But the confrontation did not occur as Vader had planned, as he would die on the second Death Star before the two could ever duel. Vader's death affected Lumaya and Flint greatly. Lumaya had seen Vader as a respectable mentor and vowed to carry on his tradition, as well as the Order of the Sith, surviving through her. Flint, on the other hand, retreated to Vader's Bass Castle on the world of Vajun to grieve his master. But while there, he and Lumaya would again cross paths. After a fierce duel, Flint was defeated and was officially taken as Lumaya's first Sith apprentice. This mentorship, however, would not last very long. Deep down, Flint was a good person, and after all of the deaths that he caused as the time as a Sith apprentice, he would defect from the Empire and refuse to kill anyone else. Lumaya, on the other hand, swore vengeance on him and ended up achieving that vengeance, tracking him down and stabbing him through the throat with her light whip. Lady Lumaya would go on to train several more Sith, and to make herself a repeated issue for Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order. Lumaya eventually aided in the corruption of Jacen Solo to the dark side, her masterpiece, transforming him partially into Darth Vader. The Dark Lady would meet her end when Grandmaster Luke Skywalker believed that the evidence of his wife's murder pointed directly to Lumaya. Without verifying these facts, in a rare moment, Luke Skywalker gave into his rage and beheaded Lumaya in a final duel. A deed that would haunt the Grand Master for the rest of his days. Lumaya was not especially powerful, as her cybernetics had limited her potential the same way that it had for Anakin. Yet another thing that she had hated Luke for the same way that Vader hated Obi-Wan. A great parallel. But she was especially cunning and very dangerous. Lumaya learned ancient Sith knowledge from holocrons of the Sith Ari himself, King Adis, one of the very few to learn directly beneath the Sith King, the undisputed Sith Ari. Lumaya even managed to perfect Darth Vectivus's Force Phantom technique and used it in many creative ways, including very cruel ones as well. Her light whip made her particularly deadly in close quarters combat, since it was such an unconventional weapon. No one really knew how to fight against it, especially in this day. Her inclusion of both energy and physical tassels on the whip also added to its effectiveness. However, Grandmaster Luke Skywalker managed to circumvent her light whip by simply utilizing two lightsabers. Luke utilized a lightsaber shodo, or a short lightsaber, in his offhand in order to catch the tassels and attack with his main weapon. As for Flint, in terms of power, he was skilled enough to challenge Jedi such as Luke Skywalker, but only as a Jedi Knight. But unlike Lumaya, he never gained a sufficient personal victory to warrant him being considered strong in the slightest. And with that, it officially ends the Sith Apprentice section of Darth Vader's list. But now we have reached the section of the High Inquisitor. In Legends, the Inquisitorius was not overseen by Lord Vader, but they reported directly to Palpatine. In Legends, Palpatine was actually terrified at the prospects of Lord Vader training anyone, and withheld a lot of Force sensitives from him because he innately feared his apprentice. There was only one time when Vader himself was given instruction to involve himself within the Inquisitor's order, and that was when he selected and trained 4 candidates to become the High Inquisitors. The first was Antinous Tremaine. He was a former Jedi Padawan with a large ego and a fascination with the dark side before the Order fell. He also had a lot in common with Anakin Skywalker, butting heads with his master, a Jedi named Dav Kailanu, who failed to train him. His master would eventually die during the Clone Wars, and Tremaine would end up being captured by the Separatists, causing a great deal of anger to build up in the young Jedi Padawan. His master had been weak, and now he was going to suffer. He mostly sat out the entirety of the Clone Wars in a prison, causing him to survive Order 66. He was then tracked down by the Empire and taken to Palpatine's deep core world of Biss, being met there with other Jedi survivors. There, he was kept prisoner with other Padawans and members of the Jedi Service Corps. Eventually, Lord Vader arrived on the world with orders from Palpatine to select worthy pupils to form the foundation of the Inquisitors. After giving them all a test, Vader found Tremaine impressive, along with 3 others that we'll discuss in just a moment. Once the 3 were selected, Vader ordered all of the other Padawans and the Service Corps members to be executed. Our young Padawan Antinous, however, turned to the dark side quite readily and dedicated himself to hunting down all fugitive Jedi. He developed particular obsessions with his targets though, specifically a Jedi by the name of Drake Logan. However, he repeatedly failed to capture or kill this target, and was given other tasks by the Empire. He also became obsessed with another Order 66 survivor named Corwin Shelvey, but a confrontation with him led Tremaine to losing an eye and an arm, requiring a cybernetic replacement for both. While Tremaine did not appear to be especially good at killing Jedi, he was actually quite talented at turning them to the dark side. Several Jedi fell to the dark side and pledged themselves to the Empire under Tremaine's direction, one of them being the legendary High Inquisitor Jarek. He would continue to hone his skills as an interrogator, having learned from the best, Vader directly. Soon though, Antinous Tremaine gained a reputation as being unparalleled in the field of interrogation, and was called upon when resilient subjects required an experienced hand. During the Galactic Civil War, he focused on rooting out rebel cells, and was responsible for fighting darkside adepts, detecting them among the ranks of the Empire. He would eventually meet his end by the hand of the New Republic shortly after the Empire's fall, as he was executed as one of the Empire's worst. The next High Inquisitor selected by Vader in this process was Lanu Pasik, a Jedi woman born on Dathomir. Although roped in with the other Padawans and the Jedi Service Corps members, she was not actually Jedi in origin, which shocked Vader. But her tenacity had impressed the Dark Lord, and so she too was selected as a High Inquisitor. She trained with the other Inquisitors and would help form the nucleus of what would become the Inquisitorius. Vader trained them by having them constantly duel one another in 2v2 or 1v3 scenarios. I wish I could say that all of the founding members of the Inquisitors were impressive darkside wielders, but to say things blatantly, they just weren't. Lanu's only notable outing was her aid in the pursuit of Drake Logan, which she ultimately failed. We lose track of her after the fall of the Empire, but it is presumed that she died as well by the hand of the New Republic in an execution. Halmir was the name of the next Inquisitor found and trained in the same fashion as the others. Though, like Lanu, he was not originally a Jedi, simply a Force adept of an unknown origin. He also participated in the hunt for the Jedi Logan. After their failure though, he remarkably was not denoted, and instead reported directly to the Emperor. Halmir was perhaps one of the weakest members of the Inquisitors though. He was never able to hold his own in battle, and had a very low pain tolerance. He even gained a reputation at being very easy to disarm in training. At one point, he was even unable to defeat a Padawan, despite the Padawan being unarmed, which, let's be honest, for an Inquisitor, that's downright pathetic. However, he found usefulness in the realm of interrogation as well, and Palpatine did have a job for him. After the Imperial Senate was dissolved, Palpatine sent him to question a former senator by the name of Omanda of Chandrila, one of the rare public figures in the galaxy who was outspokenly critical about the Emperor. During their interview though, Halmir was able to break the senator's mind, getting him to confess to treason. Halmir managed to live quite a while after this though, even outliving Jarek and the fall of the Empire, escaping New Republic forces for quite some time. In the end though, another unremarkable trainee of Lord Vader, a snake in the grass. The last of the bunch was named Gwalib, a former Jedi and a member of the Agricultural Corps. Gwalib was a little better of a duelist than Halmir was, but less so than Tremaine, as he was defeated by Tremaine many times in training. However, he was rare as he seemed to gain the Emperor's trust. He was one of the Inquisitors present on the world of Biss when Palpatine was resurrected in Legends, an honor for the Inquisitor, as only Palpatine's most trusted could be present. He ended up receiving more training directly from Sidious, which greatly enhanced his power. Gwalib could harness the Force within himself to resist pain and accelerate his own healing, something that's rare for the dark side. He was also capable of feeding on the dark side, mind control, and inflicting pain through the Force. But these were all abilities he gained after training with Palpatine. With how underwhelming these Inquisitors were, honestly, it makes it apparent that Vader cared as much about their training as he did with the Inquisitors in canon, is to say that he didn't care at all. It seemed that whenever Palpatine makes him train someone, Vader will give it minimal effort and make sure that they are competent with the lightsaber and the dark side before just leaving them entirely. We see this trend continue with the next set of individuals, which aren't Inquisitors, but rather Imperial agents of various kinds. The first agent we want to discuss is Karis, a female Skriti species which were a race of winged humanoids. She came across Lord Vader much earlier than the others on this list, as she had actually met Anakin Skywalker in the Clone War. Obi-Wan, Anakin, and one other Jedi had helped liberate her planet when she was just 13 years old. Anakin had sensed the Force was strong in her, and promised to one day return and train her. His promise would ultimately be fulfilled though, by another, Lord Vader, who returned to her homeworld following the rise of the Empire. Vader didn't actually desire to train her whatsoever, but he just needed a proxy for the Empire to rule over the world and her people. Upon returning and stating that he was there to fulfill his promise, Karis was dubious at first, but remembered who Anakin Skywalker was. This makes her one of the only people that Darth Vader trained who actually knew who he was originally as Anakin. She would only ever learn the basics of lightsaber combat from Vader. She would study the 7th form of lightsaber combat known as Juya, the ferocity form, and melded it with the traditional fighting style of her people, called Trispets, which was a form specifically meant for lightsaber wielders that could fly. It focused a great deal on swooping lunges and decapitating techniques, also known as the Sai Cha. It also seems that she did some studying of her own in the realms of Sith sorcery, as she was able to manifest smoke demons. These creatures summoned by the dark side were born of a victim's fear and sought to destroy them. After her training, Karis returned to her homeworld and upheld her end of the deal that she had made with Vader. The inhabitants now served the new empire, and she was given the title of Majestrix and made the ruler of her people. She had full command of a battalion of stormtroopers and even a small fleet of Imperial Star Destroyers. Karis became an oppressive dictator to her people, who all began to prophesy that eventually, someone who they called the One would come to save them. This drew the attention of the rebellion, and their prophesied One came in the form of Luke Skywalker. Karis would meet her end during an aerial duel with Luke, who was using an anti-gravity belt to fight on an even playing field. Given her development of a new lightsaber form, mastery of a difficult dark side technique like Force Smoke and Force Freeze, as well as her direct training with Lord Vader, we had expected Karis to be quite powerful, but a post-Battle of Yavin Luke Skywalker in the year 0 BBY was able to defeat her relatively easily, which calls all of the skill and accomplishments of this Imperial agent into deep question. The next two agents are Hethrir and Rialo, a husband and a wife duo from the planet of Ferrario. The two were handpicked by Lord Vader to receive training in the dark side. Hethrir excelled in learning the ways of the dark arts, as well as greatly enjoyed lightsaber combat and dueling. He was capable of suppressing other people's force abilities, and performed a technique that would cause a great nosebleed to an opponent, before the bleed would actually kill them. Due to his skills, he was appointed to the Procurator of Justice, head of the entire Imperial justice system. Rialo, his wife, and the two of them had a son together. She originally did not want to train with Lord Vader, but was captured by her husband and forced to accept the dark side training regardless. However, she soon learned that Vader had plans to turn her newborn son to the dark side, and her husband's plans of destroying their homeworld. As a result, she fled and would raise her son in secrecy somewhere deep in the galaxy. Hethrir, meanwhile, ended up realizing that the Empire was doomed in their fight against the rebellion, and because of this, he decided to strike out on his own. In the year 3 ABY, he established the Crochet system, which he used to conduct research. In his experimentation, Hethrir ended up accidentally summoning a mysterious being from another dimension known as Other Space. This being's name was Waru, as it was an extra-dimensional force-sensitive mass of flesh and gold plates that claimed to be a healer. In actuality, he robbed his victims of their life force to create a portal back to his home dimension. In exchange for force-sensitive victims on which to feed on, Waru claimed that he would give Hethrir absolute power over the Force. Hethrir planned on using this power to create his own resurgent empire away from Vader. Many years later though, he would attempt to kidnap the Solo children to feed them to Waru, but after intervention from the Skywalkers, Waru ended up consuming Hethrir's life force instead, ending his life. Nonetheless, he's one of our favorite trainees in the lore, a truly twisted man. Next up is Vos Tyne, an Imperial Admiral. Not much is known about his training with Lord Vader, as most of what we know were just rumors. We do know that he was Force sensitive though, and made himself stand out amongst the other admirals because of this fact. It was rumored that Tyne and Vader had a bit of a friendship, or at least saw eye to eye on most things. Within Palpatine's circle of approval, Vader began training Vos Tyne in some dark side techniques, hoping that it would only improve the Admiral's senses. At some point, Tyne killed an aspiring young Jedi and would take their lightsaber for himself. Impressive for someone trained so little, but of course, he had been trained by Vader. But he lacked any official lightsaber combat techniques and was mostly self-taught with the weapon. He most frequently used his powers to probe the minds of others and to emulate Vader's signature in the Force. He would even force choke those, being inspired by the Dark Lord. He also used the Force to boost his hearing and listen in on private conversations. Because of this, he was given a fearful reputation of having powerful sorceress abilities. Tyne eventually retired from the Imperial Navy after the Empire took control of a Dynamic Synergies Incorporated, a corporation which owned a plant on the planet of Marka. The plant, though, possessed a rare super heavy element used in the production of turbo lasers, and with Darth Vader's personal influence, Tyne was able to gain a position as the executive assistant to the factory's managing director. He would end up assassinating the director and taking the job for himself. After this, he brought on an iron-fisted cruelty to the planet and made it a more efficient asset to the Empire, making more and more weapons en masse. Despite his knowledge in the Force though, his plant would be destroyed by a squad of rebels, and he was forced to flee. Although he swore vengeance on the Alliance, he was never heard of after this event. And the last on our list is NX Devian, who is the only non-Force sensitive to be trained by Vader. Devian served during the early days of the Galactic Civil War as Palpatine's personal assassin. He was even given combat training by Lord Vader on Palpatine's orders. Vader, who taught him to never have mercy. If they draw your blood, you do not stop until they are gone. Vader's training made him equivalent in skill to the Emperor's royal guards. This was proven when Vader isolated him on a world of Hongra against a dangerous hunting party of Nagri assassins. Unarmed, NX defeated all of them, earning his place as the Emperor's assassin. After the fall of his empire, Devian would become the supreme leader of his own Imperial Remnant faction, which he called the Restored Empire. He then distanced himself from the Imperial ruling council, who were trying and failing to strike back at the New Republic. NX ended up getting caught in a contact with the last of the royal guards by the name of Kanos, hoping to use him as an emblem of courage and legitimacy to the Restored Empire. However, Kanos had remembered NX. He knew him as a cruel, evil man, Palpatine's thug, a man with no honor, a man that enjoyed nothing else but to cause pain to others. Kanos saw that he had not changed when he witnessed NX treat his underlings deplorably and to kill one of his own men for no reason than a haughty demonstration of his own skill. Kanos refused to join the Restored Empire, and much later on, the two would enter mortal combat. NX Devian would die by the hand of Kanos after gloating over his fallen enemy instead of going for the killing strike, something Vader would have not approved of. Now, while we did say that NX Devian was the last, this isn't technically true. We have decided to include a little bonus to the list. Though he stems in origin from the Star Wars Infinities universe, this odd two-part tale comes to us from the elusive Star Wars mangas Silver and Black. These books are incredibly difficult to find in the US, so much so that there isn't even an online version available, but it centers around a boy named Tau. Tau's story is a little strange. He was raised by an enclave of Jedi on the remote world of Shumari. However, they were later located and found by Vader. Tau watched as the Dark Lord of the Sith executed each and every one of his family members. In a fit of rage, Tau ignites his lightsaber against Vader, even though he was heavily injured. Vader senses the hate in the young boy's eyes and feels his fury in the Force. Fascinated, Vader takes the young Tau as his official apprentice. Just like NX Devian and Starkiller, the Dark Lord forces Tau to survive on an unnamed world against the infamous Nagri assassins. He does manage to actually do this though, which warrants Vader to continue his training. Interestingly, the two develop a sort of strange bond. Despite all the evil that he has watched the Sith do, Tau does not hate him because he was raised his whole life never to hate. In fact, he begins to see Vader as a mentor, but not in the way that the Sith normally do. He actually sees him almost as a father figure. While it is unknown whether or not the boy knew of Vader's identity of Anakin, it is known that Vader allowed Tau to see his face with his mask removed on more than one occasion. This apprentice was the only one allowed to visit him in his meditation chamber. I should also mention before we go any further that in this story, Vader is a lot softer than he is normally depicted, another product of this being an Elseworld story. Anyway, it is not known how long the two have trained together, but it was a brief period of time, as Tau remains in his youth for the entirety of their training. Soon, Vader has to take part in the Battle of Yavin, but fails to stop Luke from destroying the Death Star. This earns him a sharp scolding from Palpatine, and in order to find the young rebel, the Dark Lord retires to his meditation chamber, where he attempts to seek through the Force the rebel pilot's identity. He is then interrupted by Tau, who claims that he felt a strange sensation inside of his master, one that he had never felt before. He sensed happiness. Vader is amused by Tau's belief, and he tells the boy to attack him. Tau strikes at Vader, but the Dark Lord easily deflects his pathetic blows. He tells his apprentice that he is not attacking with ferocity, and he orders his student to use his anger, his hatred. Tau, though, is unable to harness his anger, and he cries out, claiming that he cannot feel hate. Vader screams, telling Tau that he has every reason to hate him. After all, it was he who destroyed his world, killed his parents, took everything from him. The Master then says that he cannot accept weakness, and if Tau cannot overcome this, that he is useless. Tau vows that he will become strong, which satisfies Vader for the time being. Vader eventually, though, discovers the identity of Luke Skywalker. Elated that his son is alive, he decides to dedicate his entire attention to finding and reuniting with his son. Tau, though, approaches Vader once again and says that he's ready to continue his training. But Vader says he has no time for him, that he is released back into the wider galaxy, telling him to go where he wishes, but that the Dark Lord is through with him. Tau is distraught, and he wonders why Vader has spared his life. Not just now, but before. Unfortunately, this is when Palpatine discovers that the boy exists. During a meeting with the hologram of the Emperor and Vader, Palpatine has his royal guards bring forth Tau. Sidious then commands Vader to kill him. In a swift move, Vader cuts down Tau across the chest with his lightsaber. As the hologram of Palpatine departs, the Dark Lord miraculously finds out that Tau is alive. Vader then decides to return Tau to his homeworld, where he can die. Tau thanks his master for the gesture of kindness and claims that he can sense that there is good in him. As Vader carries the boy's body across the deserted terrain of the world, he senses that a presence is following him. A Tusken Raider trained in the ways of the Force, a sole survivor of Anakin Skywalker's Tusken massacre, and he has come to avenge his brethren. The Tusken has learned basic and studied how Vader fights, how he moves. With two lightsabers fashioned from Gaddafi sticks, the Tusken catches a distracted Vader by surprise and breaks apart his mask. Before the Tusken can deliver a second blow, though, Tau awakes, summoning the last of his strength to rise to his master's defense, killing the attacker with a swift stab. With Tau's final words, he asks that Vader give up his anger. The Dark Lord actually shows a great deal of remorse over Tau's death, and he even establishes a small headstone with his name carved into it. And so, that was the story of Tau, the only apprentice that Darth Vader loved. But with that, my friends, this is a comprehensive list of Lord Vader's apprentices and those that he has trained with in the EU and Star Wars Legends, and some from even beyond. His apprentices certainly are a mixed bag. Some are unimaginably powerful to the point of becoming a terrifying threat to even Vader, while some are so disappointingly weak that they are negligible to our heroes at best. Some are cruel and evil beyond mention and compare, and others are actually kind-hearted deep down and didn't give in to Darth Vader's promptings towards the darkness. But of all of these apprentices, which one do you think deserves way more spotlight in Star Wars media? And of course, do you believe that Darth Vader is a good teacher? We are trying out something a little new by covering events and characters from the Infinites universe, so if you're interested in alternate universe lore, be sure to let us know. But until next time, my friends, thank you so much for joining us today in the archives, and may the Force be with you.